Welcome to the first installment of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project's Remembering 1922 video series. In this and all upcoming episodes of the series, the names of the interviewees have been coded to protect their identity. The years 1907 to 1924 were turbulent times throughout Europe, and in southeastern Europe, instability reigned. Lands of the Ottoman Empire, which constitute contemporary Albania, some of Bulgaria, most of Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and Turkey, experienced revolutions, 3 wars, and massive migration waves in all directions to and from the empire. This episode focuses on the experiences of Ottoman Greek migrants prior to their migration to the U.S., as recalled by their descendants. With few exceptions, existing scholarship presents such experiences as results of the political events and socioeconomic shifts impacting the lives of Ottoman Greek migrants. This episode emphasizes memories of events in the daily lives of Ottoman Greek migrants. Some are joyful, humorous, and some are sad memories of their homes and communities. Overall, this episode helps us gain an understanding of the migrants' humanity and agency. We would like to begin this episode with some joyful and humorous moments. To that end, our first story is about a playful moment between similar-aged siblings in Alatzata. Alatzata is a coastal town located on the peninsula of Erythrea, approximately 76 kilometers southwest of Izmir. The siblings that our narrator Alexa refers to are of her grandparents' generation, and specifically her grandmother.
My mother told me a story once. Apparently they had a backyard oven, one of those places where they bake the bread, and I guess she was in it cleaning it one day, and her brothers threatened to turn the oven on her.
Amusing memories between family members offer us an understanding of the bonds and connections forged in love and good times. Sheila recalls such a memory about her father's special house pet.
They had sheep for a period of time, and a ewe died giving birth to a lamb, and they were going to kill the lamb because they didn't have food for it. And my father was very attached to it and said, no, don't kill it. I want to take care of it. So they said, well, you're going to have to share your food with it, kid. And he did. He actually made some kind of, a spoon that he could spoon this kind of milky grain into the lamb's mouth. And he saved it, and it was his pet. And he would go everywhere with it. And at Easter, they slaughtered it. They ate his pet. He was hysterical, crying. You killed Kitsos. His name was Kitsos. I still remember. And they just laughed at him. They just laughed at him.
Another amusing memory comes to us from Nick, who shared his great-grandfather's first experience at a cinema in Constantinople.
And apparently Moutsos, my grandfather's father, my great-grandfather Dimitri is his real name, the fella with the thumb missing, had gone to visit him. And my grandfather took him to a movie for the first time. And they were watching some cowboy movie, and the place is packed, and everybody's, eating pasatembo, which is pumpkin seeds, because popcorn didn't exist, right? We're chewing on pumpkin seeds, looking at this movie. And there's a scene where the guy jumps off his horse, onto the horses of the stagecoach, that trope, saving the damsel in distress in the stagecoach, and he did this. And Moutsos was so excited that he stood up and said, "Atogirata, look at that guy," in the middle of the movie. And my grandfather was like, "Sit down." He says, "Did you see what he did?" He was all excited. "Atogirata,
Moutsos was quite the character, and Nick's recollections of his antics reflect the day-to-day occurrences that brought memorable adventures to his friends' lives on the island of Kutali, or Ekinlik Adası as it is known today.
Well, Kutali was a small island, very small. I mean, literally, it had two small hillsides on either end of it, and it was shaped like a spoon, which is why they call it Kutali. I doubt the whole thing was 10 miles long. You could stand on one end, on one hill, and see the other. They had a mill, they had a spring with water, so they had a windmill that made grain, and they had a spring with water. They had a couple of windmills. And my great-grandfather, Moutsos, which means in Greek is slang for first mate, had lost a thumb to dynamite because he was trying to dynamite fish, apparently, and held on to the stick a little too long, or it went off before he expected it to. So he had his one of his hands wrapped in a black handkerchief all the time to kind of hide it, because it didn't look nice, let's put it that way. And he was a character. He was very strict. And at one point there were these little dry islands around the island of Kutali. Dry islands meaning what they call Xeronisi, a dry island. And there were a couple of them that were just rock, but they were covered in crabs. So he used to take his rowboat and take all the kids in the neighborhood and put them in the boat and, row them out to one of these islands and let them loose with sacks. And they would all collect the crabs, and then they'd come back, and then they'd go, well, here's one for you, one for you, one for you, two for me, like that kind of thing. This one's small, you can keep that one, And apparently one day he took them out to this one of these little islands, and the weather came in and it got really dicey, and he brought them back in a storm in the rowboat, and all the moms were waiting for him on the beach. And it got really ugly. They gave him.
In addition to Moutsos, Nick's grandfather also lived through some adventures of his own.
The Bosporus, the school driveway, that the street that went up to the school, which was up on a hill, stopped, and it was like a T. And very often, vehicles that were trying to get to the school would pass the driveway, and then they'd either back up or turn around and then go back up. So it was evening, and my grandfather was coming back, and apparently the car had passed the driveway and was backing up and backed off the quay into the Bosporus. He said he saw the headlights go vertical. So he stripped down to his shorts and told my future grandmother to wait for him, and he dove down into the water, and there was a pocket of air in the car. And that vehicle had the president, the dean, and all the high-ranking officials of the school in it. And one by one he dove down and pulled them out of the car to the surface. So he basically did a rescue dive. And he was very confident with that because he was an island boy and spent a lot of time in the water diving, and plus with his family as divers, to him it was second nature. And then the next Monday, they were all in the dining hall having dinner, and they told everyone to hold on for a second, and they made an announcement, and they made him stand, and they pointed out to him pointed him out and said, "This guy saved all of our lives," basically.
Most interviewees' recollections of their ancestral communities in the late Ottoman Empire pertain to their occupations, and often traumatic events related to them. Such was the case for Sheila.
My father's father was the youngest son of 5 children, I believe. And he, when he became a young man, he helped take charge of his father's taverna. His father was an innkeeper in Artaiki, and he had, this taverna, and my grandfather helped to run it when he was a young man. And then he met my grandmother when her father was apparently a well-known iconographer and frescoist, and he was hired to do some work in a monastery there in Artaiki, or just outside of Artaiki near Sizigos. And they met. Maybe it was Proctor, I don't know. And so Anna and my grandfather met in Artaiki and got married and lived there for a year or two when they had my uncle, their oldest son, Emmanuel. And then there was a falling out in the family. Don't know the details of it. And they wound up moving to her family's home, which was in Peristasis in Thrace, in eastern Thrace. So he moved in with her family and, with her father and her mother. I have to tell you, although I don't know the details of how this happened, but my grandmother was actually adopted and raised by her own maternal aunt. I don't know whether her mother had too many children or, what the story was in those days. But so the parents that raised her were not her blood parents.
Adonia shared a similar traumatic experience about her grandfather from Vigeli.
My grandfather was a postman who, by the way, I do have a story about that. My mom said that he was delivering mail one time. I guess they used to deliver it by horse or a horse-drawn wagon or something like that. And I guess some Turkish men, I don't know if they were soldiers or what, shot at him. Maybe they were trying to rob him. And they shot him in the thumb and in the kneecap. And he always walked stiff-legged after that.
Another traumatic memory, this time in Renkoi, was given by Rebecca.
His father passed when he was 4, and the story I was told by my mother was that my grandfather was going to a sand pit or some kind of where they would gather up to make the concrete blocks to build the houses. And he came on his donkey, and my dad was on the donkey with him. And he told him to wait on the donkey while he went in and dug and got the sand or whatever he needed to build the concrete blocks, and it caved in on him. And my dad was on the donkey, and he was sitting there and waiting. I guess it got late, and his dad never came out. And the donkey knew enough, hey, it's dinner time. It's time for me to go home. The donkey just took off and took him back to his house. When they saw my dad coming as this little boy with no daddy on the donkey, they all ran.
All such stories about the occupations of their ancestors were not always traumatic, however, as attested by Raffaele.
My grandfather's family operated what was referred to as a han or hane. I guess it was a small hotel, livery. When I went to Turkey and I saw the village, there was one old gentleman who knew enough that he pointed out and said where it used to be. And it looked like the village was situated on the Silk Road, right off it. So, it must have been, their hane must have been kind of a way station on that. Because I understand the whole family was traders, and they were all good horsemen and all that, from what I understood. My grandmother's family, I don't think, was quite as well-to-do. Her father was a master builder. The stories I heard was he was very skilled at building minarets that didn't fall down. So, he pretty much earned his living. He earned his living every summer going to different towns where he had commissions to build a minaret. And then the other things I understood, like my grandmother's family would do, during the winter months and everything else, they would weave carpets. She was skilled at weaving carpets, and then she also said that they were near the poppy processing areas of Turkey, and they all knew how to process poppy seeds into opium. And I think, a lot of the families made extra income doing that.
Next, a bittersweet memory about Mundanya was shared by Jesse.
Yaya enjoyed living there in Mundanya. From what I remember her saying, her house was over a bakery or next to, or else a bakery was right there. And I believe that's how she learned how to bake pastries so well. I mean, her recipes are what we judge by every other Greek pastry that we taste, because they're just fantastic. And anyway, so when she was in Mundanya, she did have some friends. She was an only child. Her mother had many miscarriages, and Yaya was very sad about that. She really wanted to have brothers or sisters. So she was good friends with her cousins, and she would tell me that cousins are the best friends to have. Her cousin is the one that arranged the marriage so she could get into the United States. She told one sister that she remembers seeing dolphins in the bay of Mundanya. She went to school up to 8th grade. She was taught French. My mother would say she was very intelligent. The situations that she was in, a girl, in the 19-teens, didn't go to school for very long. They usually got married fairly quickly. Yaya was an exception.
In conclusion, day-to-day life in the late Ottoman Empire during times of relative peace and stability engendered a variety of experiences that were transgenerationally transferred to the descendants of Ottoman Greek immigrants. We conclude this episode with a prelude for the upcoming episodes that will begin exploring the motivational factors for Ottoman Greek immigration to the U.S. This prelude comes to us from the memories of Cindy about her grandfather's life in Urdu.
He said that he had a boat and he used to go out on the Black Sea. He stopped school when he was, I think, probably what we would call junior high. They used to go to church in caves because the Turks didn't want them to do church. And his father they were wealthy. His father had a lot of land and he was the mayor of Bona. So they must have been there for centuries. His father drank, and when he drank, he would give things away like the cows or the property, and most people would give it back, but every once in a while somebody would keep something. So my papa never drank. He was the oldest son. He had 2 older sisters and a bunch of younger ones. They sent him to his godfather to learn how to run a grocery store. So for a while he had a grocery store. And then he went to some other person and learned how to do shoes. And at that point, when he was a teenager, things were changing. Up until that point, if you were Greek, you could pay $3 for each boy not to go into the military. So that's what they did. And then they were changing that, and they were taking the Greek boys into the military. And from the stories, it didn't sound like a healthy place to be. They were working them too hard, and they were dying. So by the time he was a teenager, he decided that he shouldn't be there.
The researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project would like to thank you, our listeners, for your support of this important research. We look forward to your comments and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed producing it. See you next time.